This is the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm Michael Rosica, and joining me today is my wonderful colleague, architect Emily Hobbs.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dive into CE topics today.
So in this follow-up episode of our Construction Evaluation Division series, we'll be examining Section 2, Construction Observation in detail. Last time we covered pre-construction activities, and today we're moving to what happens once construction actually begins. Today's goal is to thoroughly explore CE Section 2. So recently I was reviewing the CE exam with some boot campers, and I realized despite our comprehensive coverage of each individual objectives in the CE exam inside of our CE 101 study course, we never really approached it from the more broader, sectional viewpoint, the more zoomed out view. And that's when I realized that this would actually be some really good podcast material, because so many candidates are simply trying to get a clear picture of what they'll encounter on test day. So in today's podcast, we're going to offer a comprehensive review of CE Section 2. This information is particularly helpful for those who weren't successful in taking the CE exam, since when candidates don't pass, NCARB really only tells you which section you failed, without specifying any individual questions or objectives. So there's all these people running around the internet saying, "What's Section 2? I failed Section 2. How do I understand Section 2? And today, Emily and I are going to provide that clarity.
That's right. That's exactly why this breakdown is so valuable. For instance, when I meet with ARE boot campers at our weekly meetings, one of the exercises that I ask them to do is to actually rewrite NCARB's objectives and to put it into their own words as a way to better understand what those objectives actually are. So it's really fun to do. It's a really fun and effective exercise to have them do. And it's amazing to watch them have that kind of light bulb moment, that aha moment where they're actually realizing what NCARB is asking for. It's a good exercise to change NCARB's formal language into something that actually resonates with you, sticks with you, that you can understand in your own words. So that simple practice, it really creates a more active approach through studying, less of a passive studying approach. And that way the concepts can really stick because you can process the information through your own lens and your own words again, rather than just trying to memorize what it is that NCARB is asking you to learn in their own language.
So let's get started with a quick refresher on the architect exam structure. Guys, the ARE consists of 6 exams, and within each exam, you'll find multiple sections, and these sections are further divided into specific objectives. This organizational structure matters significantly because, as I mentioned earlier, NCARB's feedback on unsuccessful attempts typically only points to the section level, such as like Section 2, rather than telling you specific objectives or even questions you got wrong. And I frequently tell our ARE bootcamp participants that if your study approach isn't aligned with NCARB's stated objectives and you don't have crystal clarity about the exam you're studying for, you're not really preparing for the architect exam. You're studying some other program. And the exam writers develop questions directly from these objectives and sections. That is their framework. So it's essential to incorporate this information into your studying. In fact, it's the single most valuable resource available for your preparation, aside from the Architect Exam Podcast.
Absolutely. You're getting the information directly from the source, exactly as NCARB intended. That way it's straight from, the NCARB horse's mouth. And why not just study directly from the source and, know what it is that they want you to know for the exam?
All right, let's get started with NCARB's definition of the construction evaluation exam. Let's cue up that NCARB music, and I'm going to put on my bow tie and top hat. Here we go. This exam will assess objectives related to construction contract administration and post-occupancy evaluations of projects. This division will focus on issues related to bidding, negotiation processes, support of the construction process, and evaluation of completed projects. Candidates must develop an understanding of and abilities in construction contract execution, construction support services, including construction observation, which we're talking about today, and shop drawing and submittal review, payment request processing, and project closeout. In addition, candidates must also demonstrate an understanding and abilities in project evaluation of integrated building systems and their performance. CE is divided into 4 sections. Section 1 is pre-construction activities. Section 2 is construction observation. Section 3 is administrative procedures and protocols. And Section 4 is project closeout and evaluation. All right, let's kill that NCARB music. And what does that actually mean? Basically, NCARB's saying CE is all about what happens after your drawings are finalized. It covers that critical transition from design to reality, the bidding process, construction admin, site visits, and evaluating the completed building. CE isn't about creating new design solutions. It's about ensuring that what was designed actually gets built correctly. It's about switching from your creative designer hat to your technical observer hat. You're becoming the project advocate, the owner's representative, making sure their investment delivers what was promised. Think about it like this. If design exams are about creating the recipe, CE is about making sure the meal turns out exactly as planned, with no unexpected ingredients or cooking mishaps.
That's a great way to put it. I love the recipe analogy. And I think it's also important to remember, and I know I've said this before previously in another episode, but we as architects, we don't just design and create these drawings and hand them over to the contractor and construction team and hope for the best. We really need to physically be a part of the, all the activities that happen throughout construction, and we need to play a role and physically be present to actually see what happens. So remember that this construction administration phase is very important because we as architects have created these construction documents over time, and we know all the levels of detail and all the intricacies of that design. And ultimately, we know and are closest to the original design intent. So therefore, we should be closely tied to what physically happens on site for that project. And we need to be present and play that crucial role to the construction team.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey guys, we know you might be driving, working out, or just on the move while listening to this podcast about construction observation. So taking notes probably isn't an option right now, but don't worry. After recording this podcast, Emily and I sat down and we created a fantastic set of study notes that we formatted into a handy 2-pager PDF. Just visit youngarchitect.com/observation and grab your free study notes to print and add to your ARE exam materials. Okay, back to the podcast. All right, let's get to the good stuff and talk about Section 2. And let me put on my NCARB hat and let's cue up that music. But they said, visiting the job site throughout the course of construction and the architect's roles and responsibilities. That is their summary for Section 2. Guys, this is the largest section of the construction evaluation division, which is 29 to 41% of the CE exam questions. So you're going to see more questions about this more than anything else when taking construction evaluation. And so this section really tests your understanding of the architect's role during construction site visits. That's everything today. That's evaluating construction for compliance with documents and codes and determining construction progress and schedule adherence. I got to be honest with you, after reviewing the NCARB practice questions for Section 2, I've noticed that this section is all over the map. The questions cover an incredibly wide range of topics. It goes from identifying construction materials and pipe cleanouts to calculating payment applications to dealing with code violations, understanding egress requirements, responding to RFIs, and even handling like weather delays. And I always tell the candidates that real-world architecture experience doesn't really give anyone an advantage with accelerating through the ARE process. I've been running the ARE bootcamp and coaching people on the architect exam since 2015, and I've seen plenty of professionals with decades of experience struggle to pass their exams. I'd say like Lorenzo's a perfect example. The guy had 25 plus years experience working in architecture and construction before he even started studying for his first exam. And I also say he's probably one of the smartest people I know. Did his experience help him with passing the architect exam? A little bit, but he still had to work really hard to pass every exam. I also know for a fact that studying actually helped him more in the office than the office helped him on the exam. And the way you do it in the office every day is not always the correct answer NCARB or the AIA documents want to see. And they love these types of questions. Meanwhile, in bootcamp, I've coached dozens of recent college graduates with zero professional experience who studied effectively and passed their exams with flying colors. In general, I truly don't think experience gives you an advantage on most sections of the architect exam. However, and I don't want to scare anyone right here, but I think this exam section, CE section 2, more than any other test section, is where real world experience might actually help. If you've spent time on construction sites and dealt with these issues firsthand, you'll have an intuitive grasp of many of these concepts. And if not, we'll discuss this later when we talk about how to study for it.
Yeah, I really agree. Whether you have experience with visiting job sites, or maybe you're familiar with the construction process, or maybe you haven't had any in-field experience, this section is dense with that information and that knowledge that will teach you what the correct processes are. It'll give you that confidence, that knowledge, and you'll learn best practices while completing a site visit.
So, section 2 has 3 objectives, and we're going to look at each one of them pretty in depth. But here's a quick summary of all 3 of those objectives. Okay, objective 2.1 focuses on understanding the architect's role during construction activities, what to observe during site visits, how to document observations, and distinguishing between design intent and the contractor's means and methods. Objective 2.2 is about evaluating construction conformance, checking completed work against the contract documents, addressing non-conforming work, and handling unforeseen conditions. And objective 2.3 covers determining construction progress. It's about reviewing work against the schedules and the schedule of values and understanding how delays impact the project timeline. There's a few key topics that cut across all 3 of these objectives. This would be, I'd say, site observation protocols, like when to visit, what to look for, and how to document what you see. Then there's also a distinction between observation and supervision. Architects observe for general conformance, but don't supervise construction. I'd say safety on the job site. What do you do if you observe something unsafe? Contract documents as a control mechanism, how your drawings and specs set the standard for evaluation. Documentation standards, field reports, meeting minutes, quality control processes, identifying and addressing non-conforming work. Schedule analysis, coordination with the consultants, I'd say even communication protocols, effectively reporting to the owner and the contractor what you saw on the job site.
Yeah, Mike, I've got to say, one of my first jobs, I had a new job and I was tasked with going out and doing a job site visit. And I remember my boss kind of warning me and saying like, okay, this is a big deal. You're going to kind of be the in-between between the owner and the contractor. And him telling me that kind of freaked me out a little bit. I got a little intimidated, but fortunately I was studying for the exams while I was at this job. And I kind of knew what to expect because of this division in the AREs. And I knew there wasn't going to be any surprises because I knew what, job site visits entailed and what to expect. So think of it that way when you're studying for this division. There really shouldn't be much surprises on a job site visit, but let's say there are protocols, there are forms in place, there is kind of a methodology to these things. So I really love this division because it puts an organization and a kind of action list for what you do once you get on the site, when you leave the site, how you document everything. So, just know that there is a criteria to follow, and it doesn't have to be this intimidating role of you playing the middleman between all the parties. So this section, section 2 is really the meat of construction administration phase in construction project. So it's where you're regularly visiting the site, you're monitoring the progress, and you're ensuring the quality of what's happening. In this section, you're going to learn to have a clear understanding of your role and your responsibilities during the construction administration phase, which is really important for real life, at work, but also, of course, on the exam. So this is where the theory really meets reality and your construction documents are truly put to the test. So section 2, we've talked about section 1 before. Section 2 directly builds upon the foundation that was laid in section 1, which was pre-construction, where you're planning your kind of agenda and your plan to start construction. And section 1 is contractor selection, which we discussed before. So now we're really transitioning to the active site observation period. In some of our other podcast episodes about construction documents, we've discussed how there is a thorough documentation up front that directly impacts the success of this phase, the observation phase. So the better your documents are going in, the smoother these site visits will go.
Exactly. Making sure your documents are properly set up and coordinated and dialed in, especially your specifications. If you haven't listened to Emily's specifications podcast, I highly recommend it. All right, Emily, let's do it. It's time for my favorite part. Let's break down these objectives. Let's start with taking a closer look at objective 2.1. Let's cue up that music. And NCARB says, evaluate the architect's role during construction activities. This objective assesses the architect's responsibility to the owner during construction site visits and subsequent documentation, including site observations and action items for project team members. You must recognize the contractor's responsibilities to the architect, including change orders, applications for payments, shop drawings, and other submittals, and the appropriate level of detail required for the schedule of values based on project size, scope, phasing, requirements, and schedule. You must also know the difference between the architect's design intent and the contractor's means and methods. Finally, you must identify the appropriate limits and extent of the architect's authority and actions during construction. All right, so what does that actually mean in practice? The architect's responsibilities during site visits include making regular visits based on the project's complexity, observing work for conformance and with the contract documents, documenting observations and field reports, communicating issues to the owner and contractor, following up on the action items from previous visits, and most importantly, not supervising day-to-day construction activities. The contractor has specific responsibilities to the architect as well, including submitting shop drawings and samples for approval, preparing and submitting change orders, providing applications for payment, creating and updating the schedule of values, providing construction and payment schedules, and responding to the architect's field reports and directives. But I'd say one of the most critical distinctions in this objective is understanding the difference between design intent and means and methods. The design intent is what is to be built, which is really the architect's domain, whereas means and methods is how it's built, which is all the contractor's expertise. Think of it this way. An architect is like a cookbook author who specifies the ingredients and what the final dish should look like, but it's the chef or the contractor who decides which pots to use and the specific cooking techniques to employ. In architectural terms, you might specify a paint color and a finish quality, but the contractor decides the application method, the number of codes, and the specific equipment used. The limits on the architect's authority are also crucial to understand. You have the authority to reject non-conforming work and interpret contract documents, but you have no authority over safety procedures and only limited authority to stop work. You can approve minor changes, but significant changes typically require owner approval. And documentation is your protection here. It's field reports, the site observation notes, photo documentation, communication logs, and meeting minutes all create a record of your observance and decisions.
Yes, and it's very important to reiterate this message that you really need to understand your roles and responsibilities in this section, especially the difference between observation on a job site and a site visit versus supervision. You definitely want to know that distinction. As architects, we're there to verify that work is being done on a job according to the contract documents, but we are not there to tell the contractor how to do the job. When I'm on a site, I'm looking for results of things that are installed. I am not looking for means and methods as to how that was achieved. That is not my responsibility. So for example, if I were to specify windows, being installed correctly and flashed properly, I don't need to dictate what tools or installation sequence the contractor uses in order to achieve that. So that distinction, again, between observation and supervision saves a lot of headaches during the construction administration phase. And it keeps liability where it belongs. So be sure to know who is responsible for what on a job site.
All right, let's take a look at objective 2.2, evaluate construction conformance with contract documents, codes, regulations, and sustainability requirements. So NCARB says you will need to be able to analyze the contractor's completed work against the project requirements and identify non-conforming construction on site. This may also require evaluating the impacts of unforeseen conditions and material substitutions against code, quality, and program requirements. You will need to coordinate your evaluation of construction conformance with that of your consultant and your owner's consultants. Guys, this objective is all about quality control, making sure that what's being built actually matches what was designed and specified. Emily just recorded a fantastic podcast on quality assurance and quality control. I highly recommend checking out. When analyzing completed work against requirements, you'll be comparing installed work to drawings and specifications, checking dimensions, materials, and installations, verifying systems, integration, and performance, and using various testing and inspection procedures. Identifying non-conforming constructions is a critical skill. You need to recognize common construction defects, use effective visual inspection techniques, properly document any non-conformance, follow communication protocols for reporting deficiencies, and establish follow-up procedures to verify that corrections have been made. Unforeseen conditions are the bane of our existence. They are practically guaranteed on any project. You'll need to evaluate different types of unforeseen conditions, whether it's the subsurface conditions or existing building conditions or hazardous materials, and assess their impact on code compliance, quality, and program requirements. Material substitutions are another reality of construction. You'll need to apply criteria for or equal determinations, verify code compliance of substituted materials, compare performance, evaluate aesthetic impacts, and even assess sustainability impacts. And then you got to coordinate your consultants. Coordination of consultants is essential for comprehensive evaluation. This includes joint site visits with engineering consultants, following established communication protocols, resolving conflicting observations, integrating the consultant findings into your overall assessment, and effectively working with the owner's consultants.
So, do you ever follow or see those construction fail posts where people will take a photo on a job site and something is clearly not right and not coordinated and has gone wrong? Those are always fun. But just to reiterate the message of this section, that when we're completing job site visits, you're looking for non-conforming work, and we're doing that because it's really about a sense of verification. We're verifying that the design intent is being met. So on a site visit, I always tell my team to bring the right tools with them, like a tape measure, a camera, even a copy of the specifications. That way they have something to use to verify the work they're physically seeing. Those are verification tools that are your best defense if you come across something that's non-conforming and may potentially cause an issue later down the road. And when you do find something that's not right, document it immediately and clearly. And again, this is not about catching someone or the construction team or the contractor doing something wrong, even if it's really funny and ends up on a construction fail page. It's about ensuring that the owner is getting exactly what they've contracted you for. It's even just catching a small issue can really stop that snowball effect for it becoming a larger issue later down the road. It'll save you a lot of time and headache to just kind of preventatively address smaller issues up front. So we're really trying to just make sure that the project stays on track and that everything's accepted by the owner.
And anticipating it versus being surprised and making a big deal about it. Okay, finally, let's cover objective 2.3, determine construction progress. Okay, NCARB says, construction observation also requires the review of work in place against the contractor's construction schedule and schedule of values, and understanding the impact of delays along the critical path. So this objective is about making sure the project's on track, both in terms of physical completion and financial progress. When reviewing work against the construction schedule, you need to understand different types of construction schedules, verify that milestones are being met, track the progress using established methodologies, review schedule updates, and identify any schedule slippage that might impact project completion. I'd also say reviewing work against the schedule of values is just as important. You need to understand the purpose and structure of schedule of values, assess percentage completion for payment applications, ensure the schedule of values has an appropriate level of detail, be able to detect upfront and other payment issues, and maintain proper documentation for any payment disputes. I'd say understanding critical path impacts is crucial for schedule management. You need to know the basics of critical path method, be able to distinguish between critical and non-critical activities, understand the concept of float and its implications, recognize different types of delays, and know how to document and address the delays when they happen.
Yeah. And I think that understanding the schedule of values is particularly important here because when the contractor submits a payment application to you, you'll need to verify that the work that they're billing for is actually completed and in place before you can approve that payment application. For example, if they're claiming on their payment application that 75% of the framing is complete, but you go onto the job site and you see that only maybe 50% of the framing is complete, that's a problem. And so that's where the schedule of values becomes your kind of roadmap to track those financial pay apps and that progress. And it keeps that consistency and accuracy so that everyone gets paid fairly for the work that's actually completed on site.
Yeah, this reminds me of that podcast we put out recently about, I think it was called Drawings versus Specifications, where we talked about how drawings and specifications are complementary to each other because a lot of people seem to think that specifications take precedence over drawings. I went into this long thing, Emily, about how if that was the case, then it's the architect's job to approve the payment applications. And if the contractor didn't ask the question and just assumed the specifications took precedence over the drawings, then the architect would be forced to pay the contractor for not following the intent of what was in the documents and only getting 50% of what is there.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
All right, let's talk about some of the common mistakes people make with CE Section 2. I got 7 of them, and I'm gonna power through them pretty quick. So the first is, I'd say, confusing observation with supervision. Guys, always remember, architects observe for conformance to the documents, but they never supervise. Supervision is the contractor's job. The second is related to improperly dealing with safety issues. If you see something on site, you don't have the authority to stop work, but you have a responsibility to report it to the appropriate parties. Understanding this is crucial. The third is failing to understand the limits of your authority during construction. Know what you can and cannot approve, what requires owner's input, and what's outside your purview entirely. The fourth would be overstepping into the contractor's means and methods is a frequent mistake. Remember those analogies. Focus on the recipe, not how the chef chooses to stir the pot. The fifth is documentation issues are a major source of problems. Not properly documenting observations and communications, missing non-conforming work due to incomplete inspections, or failing to coordinate with specialty consultants can lead to significant problems. The sixth is schedule-related mistakes, which can include not understanding the critical path in construction schedules and approving payment applications without actually verifying the work. And the last, and probably one of the biggest, is technical knowledge gaps can also cause problems on this test. I'd say inadequate knowledge of how building codes work or regulations relevant to site observation, improper handling of unforeseen conditions, material substitutions, not understanding contract requirements for site visits and documentation, or overlooking sustainability requirements during construction.
Yes, I think one of the biggest issues or mistakes I see in site visits or in practice is documentation or the lack of it. When architects don't visit a site regularly or don't, create documentation of what they saw on site regularly, it could lead to a lot of problems and a lot of he said, she said type of language and, accusations, which are situations that are completely avoidable if we have proper documentation while completing a site visit. So documentation is, taking good photos, marking the date that you were there, the weather you were there in a field report, and compiling all that information and keeping all that information really organized and keeping good records of a job site visit. It's not very exciting work, but it's very needed. Maybe during site visits, it doesn't seem that exciting to keep track of everything, but later on down the road, if something does go wrong, you will want those records to kind of back you up on any changes that were made or any conversations that were had. And we all know that issues arise during construction and during our projects. Nothing is perfect. So this is really our best way to kind of keep track of, all of the complexities throughout construction and through our projects. And it's a good way to manage issues that might arise. I have a lot of stories about site visits and things that got, weird very quickly. I've even been hired. I wasn't necessarily the architect of a project, but was hired later after the fact when a roof installation was failing. And they essentially hired me to kind of weigh in and take a look at what was going wrong. And I asked for copies of their field reports and photos that were taken during construction. And by going through those documents, which, architects and contractors should all keep records of, I saw that there was inclement weather while the roof was being installed and that it was raining. And I was able to fall back on that information and say, I think that the roof membrane that was installed is failing because it was applied while it was raining, which just leads to like bubbles and air within the membrane, which can lead to the roof failing, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, I didn't refer to those documents, until like a year after the roof was installed, but I was able to use it as a record to kind of argue the case against improper installation. And I give a lot of these stories of kind of real life experience in our CDT 101 course, which is available at Young Architect Academy. I really emphasize the importance of creating consistent documentation systems and creating templates that you could use when you go to a job site. Having a template to fill out is a lot easier to navigate than being on a hot job site or maybe a raining job site where you're overwhelmed and trying to remember all of the items you need to document while you're there. So even something just as simple as having a standardized field report template to fill out as a checklist while you're there, make sure that you covered all your bases and gathered all the information that you need while you're there. Again, it's a preventative measure that really will help navigate issues or disputes that come up on a job site or throughout a construction project if they do happen.
All right, so how do you study for this section of the CE exam? In our CE 101 course on the Young Architect Academy, we've got 2 case studies, we've got flashcards, we've got practice questions, we've got videos, hours of video content breaking things down. I even recently made the AHPP companion documents to help you navigate using the Architect's Handbook Professional Practice much easier for the architect exams. And so CE 101 is available through our membership that gives you access to all these materials because there's a lot of overlap between the different exams. And when you're studying for CE on the Young Architect Academy, you're also going to need to use our AI Contracts 101 course and our Building Codes 101 course as well. Just visit youngarchitect.com/CE101. But beyond the Young Architect Academy, I always recommend some additional study methods. I'd say review all the AI contract documents that are listed in the NCARB ARE guidelines. I don't support the piecemeal approach, because it just doesn't work. You should be able to understand and make sense of all those documents that are on that list. I'd say practice reading and evaluating construction schedules, learn about building codes related to construction inspections, egress, and fire, find construction site documents from real projects in the office or online, try to find some field reports that have construction photos. See if you can review some schedule of values or payment applications. I'd say take a look at the Architect's Handbook Professional Practice chapters on construction administration. And then the Project Delivery Practice Guide has a fantastic chapter on construction. I would go through that all pretty thoroughly. There's a lot of YouTube content for topics related to this section. And I said this in our CE 101 course, but find a good building construction book and look at pictures. Like the Fundamentals of Building Construction by Edward Allen. There's the Olin's Guide. There's the Meta Building Construction book, even the Francis Ching construction books. And read those books from a perspective of what would be important to know during construction, not design. You're not designing wall sections. What would be important to know during the construction phase? And I think this is where a lot of people go off the rails with CE, is they think that, this is a building construction exam when it's not. It's not about designing the perfect wall section or, mastering mechanical systems or any of this stuff. It's about understanding how do we get this wall section installed and what do we need to know about this mechanical system for installation, and so be careful with this area.
Yeah, I can see how there could be some overlap in that thinking. Like it's identifying something that's not conforming, but then you're tempted to start designing what the correction would be, right? And it's, definitely understand the difference in this section versus others. Definitely read the PDPG guide, focus on the chapter that has to do with construction, and also be sure to review the template forms in the book. There's a lot of templates from CSI that are used during construction. I really love the Project Delivery Practice Guide. It's written from the point of view of specification writers. It's not written by architects or contractors. So you really get a fresh way of understanding this information from a different perspective. And it gives you a really fresh way of understanding the information and project delivery methods. I think it's a really easy read. I use it as a table of contents, really. I refer to it a lot when I just need to look something up really quick. I also want to add one more thing to your list of additional study methods. And I know that I've said this before and I'm repeating myself, but that's because it's very important. And I'm going to quote you, Mike, because I love that you always remind ARE boot campers of this, that we are not just studying to pass an exam. We're studying to be better at our jobs and to be more responsible architects and more ethical architects. And this is our duty as practicing licensed professionals. So keep that in mind while you're studying for this section. I know there's a lot of information, a lot of dense material. It's tempting to study quickly and get through all the information quickly, but really use this kind of list of additional study methods to really learn the information for yourself and take in the information through your own lens and your own understanding. Because by doing that, I strongly believe that you'll be able to recall the information on exam day much quicker. Not just kind of doing all of the NCARB recommended studying, but looking for real life examples and even just searching online and doing a deep dive will really help you to understand the information in your own words and your own understanding. So whether it's looking at projects at work or even just searching online, do that deep dive to find examples of this in practice in the real world. Again, it'll help that information stick because you're not just reading it through someone else's words, you're breaking down the material and understanding it for yourself.
All right, Emily, let's wrap up what we've covered today. Section 2, construction observation. It's a mouthful, but it's a critical part of the CE exam, making up almost 40% of the questions you'll face. It's all about balancing oversight with contractor autonomy, being present and vigilant without overstepping your role. It's about understanding the architect's roles, responsibilities during construction. It's crucial. It's distinguishing between the design intent and means and methods, documentation, and how critical it is for protecting all parties. If you're looking for additional support, consider taking our ARE Bootcamp for a structured approach to all sections of the ARE, or our CE 101 course for focused content specifically around construction and evaluation division. Just visit academy.youngarchitect.com. And as a final encouragement, remember that understanding the architect's role during construction is crucial, not just for passing exams, but for your entire career as an architect. This section tests practical knowledge that you'll use on every project you work on. And in our next episode, we're going to cover Section 3, administrative procedures and protocols, which focuses on the documentation necessary to the construction process.
And try to stay excited about this material, everyone. This is your profession. And in order to be an expert at this stuff, you'll need to stay excited about it. So this section about the exam is about really seeing your design come to life. And there's something really thrilling about that, watching your project transform from design and drawings to a physical reality. So stay excited about it. And also in staying excited, understand your role and practice your role during the construction observation. Doing that well will give you confidence to speak up at job site visits. It'll also help you to advocate for your design and advocate for your client and the owner of a project. That really makes you a valuable team member and is very critical during construction. So when you're studying and if you start to feel yourself getting bogged down by all the technical details of this section, feel free to revisit with this podcast episode in order to reconnect with the bigger picture of why all of this matters. I find that understanding the why behind all of these processes really makes even the driest part of this exam more engaging and more memorable. Try to stay excited about it as you work through this material, as challenging as it may be, and that might help the studying process be that much easier.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.